Hello and welcome to the Academic Learning Centre's EDED11458 session on Unpacking Assignment Number 1. I'm your presenter, Dr. Karen Stokes. There are a number of keys to successful assignment writing. The first of these is to understand what is expected of you in the assignment, and for here you need to examine two documents, firstly the task itself and secondly the marking criteria. As well as this, you will be required to have some skills that are being developed while you are doing this assignment. And these involve pre-writing activities, the actual drafting of the response that you're going to make, and referencing. But perhaps more importantly than all, the best key to successful assignment writing is to seek support when it is needed. So let's have a look at what it takes to create an academic essay. The first thing you need to do is examine the question and the criteria sheet. Then we go through the pre-writing activities. Then we create our draft paragraphs, followed by a check of the referencing, a final proofread and an edit, and then you are ready to submit. Firstly, we need to analyse the assignment question. And here we need to look at a number of different areas. The first of these is the instructional words. What kind of document or assignment is it that you are expected to produce? How is it expected to be done? And what key terms and concepts are necessary for you to understand and to present in the assignment in order to make sure that it answers the question? What is the topic? What do I need to research? Are two very important questions that you need to ask yourself very early on. The third area is the delimiters. Now, the delimiters basically mean, where do I stop? After all, once you've started research, you might find that you can write far more than simply the number of words that is expected from you for that specific assignment. So you need to check both the topic and the instructions to understand the delimiters. So let's examine your question. Here is an excerpt from your unit profile which gives the task description for the assignment that you are going to be sitting. The first area we look at are the instructional words. Now, the instructional words here says that in no more than 1,500 words, so you have a limit here, a word limit. You also have some key concepts, the impact of past and present representations and the attitudes and views that you have formed on the topic itself. There are other key concepts in here. I'm only pointing out a couple of them, but you can choose almost any of the key words from the assignment in order to create those key concepts. And then we have the delimiters, and the delimiter in this particular instance says that you must restrict your responses to information pertaining to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. Now, when we look at the criteria sheet, we find that here are a number of different gauges against which your work will be reviewed. And you can use those as subheadings in your assignment to gather your thoughts together. You certainly don't need to keep these as subheadings at the end of the assignment, but it helps if you have some idea of where your information is to be slotted. So we have knowledge and understanding, we have impact of historical policies, we have critical reflections, and we have engagement and participation in education and care settings, and culturally appropriate language and academic conventions. Now, if you use each one of those as a subheading, you can very easily slot your researched information underneath those headings and thereby begin to create the assignment that you need to write. The second thing we need to do once you've developed an idea of what you are going to be writing about is to develop a word allocation plan, and there are three areas of interest. The first is the introduction, and it comprises approximately 10% of your total word count. Now, that seems to be a reasonably large amount of the word count that you've got, but that's because you need to be able to introduce not only the topic that you're writing about, but also the direction that you are going to take in the assignment itself. Unfortunately, the introduction is always written last. And if you have one of these people who starts at the beginning with the introduction to start off with, then you are working your assignment the wrong way around. There are reasons for why it is written last, and we can explain those to you at one of the ALC workshops. Sometimes introductions also include a literature review. Now basically this is simply a summary of all of the major points that you have managed to find through your research. The body comprises the largest quantity of words from your assignment, and it should be approximately 80%. It's divided pretty well evenly between the topics and concepts, so you can see now that already, having chosen the key concepts from your question and also from your marking criteria, you now have little headings that you can use to evenly divide up your word count. Paragraphs should range between 150 and 300 words each. Now that works out to be approximately 2/3 to a page and a half of double-spaced size 12 font writing. If you have your writing closer together, then of course that's not going to take up as much space. But if your paragraphs start to get above 300 words, then you have too many ideas within the same paragraph. Cut them in half. Finally, the conclusion also comprises 10% of the word count, and the conclusion is always written before the introduction and after the body, so that you know what you have written about, and then you can introduce that easily. There are no references or new material permitted in a conclusion, so this is the only space in the entire assignment where you do not have to justify what you have stated or any of your claims, because now in the conclusion you are able to make up your own mind. The first of the pre-writing skills is note-taking. Now, note-taking can take place within lectures, and here we need to listen for key ideas and summarise themes. Do not try and copy down verbatim what your lecturer is saying to you. It's much easier simply to look for those key ideas, and at the end of each area of information that you have been given, pause for a moment and quickly summarise. This is going to be much easier if you're doing this course as an external student, because everything will be pre-recorded and you can simply pause the projection when you need to do that summary. But you can also take notes from your readings. Now here we need a number of other skills such as marking the page, being able to paraphrase, and how to reference correctly. We'll come back to these at another time. But you also need to create a note-taking plan. And one of the easiest ways of doing this, in order to help you organise material for your assignments, is to begin with this plan that I'm going to show you now. The first of these is the introduction. Today's topic is about, and you only need a couple of words to fill that out. Then you write down definitions. This word or concept means such and such, and you write those definitions in your own words as much as possible. Then you dot point the main points, and often the presentation headings are enough information for you to be able to create those main points and to allow them to remind you of the information that you have read in total. You also need to provide evidence, so an example of the particular topic that you're talking about would be a good idea, and of course also emphasise what is the most important aspect of that particular topic. And then finally, to sum the topic up, a quick sentence on your conclusion. Now you can see that that plan has a 6-step methodology to it. You can use a similar methodology for writing the paragraphs of your assignment as well. Here are some other pre-writing activities. Skim reading. Now, skim reading is one way of very quickly ascertaining whether or not the document that you have researched is going to be useful for you. So the first thing you need to do is look at the abstract, read the introduction and read the conclusion. If they are understandable, then chances are it's probably a reasonable document for you to continue to peruse. However, if the language is a little bit too difficult, put it aside. There's plenty more information out there for you. You do not need to use the first 2 or 3 items that you come across. After you've done that first skim reading, then you read the first sentence of each paragraph. Now, this takes a little bit of skill. You can, if you've got a hard copy, you can highlight the first sentence without reading it all the way through the entire document and then go back and read it. If you're doing it online, you simply copy and paste the first sentence of every paragraph into a separate document and then you read that document. The second of the pre-writing activities is questioning. Now here, as you read through those first sentences, you might note that there are some questions. There might be some things that you need to know a little bit more about. Now, those questions are there to fill in your gaps in knowledge. And one of the advantages of only reading the first sentence of each paragraph in your skim reading is that you now have some idea, some indication of where those gaps in your knowledge may be able to be filled from. So you can go back to those individual paragraphs and just read those specific paragraphs in full. You also need to practice marking the page. Now, marking the page is not just a matter of highlighting everything, underlining great slabs of prose, and writing commentary in the margins. Marking the page to be effective means that you need to mark the minimum number of words that make sense in a sequence within a paragraph. So you can summarize a paragraph, and I'll show you an example of this in a moment, but you can summarize a paragraph very quickly by simply highlighting maybe half a dozen words rather than trying to keep the prose intact. When we look at the body paragraphs of your assignment, you need to understand that what you are doing with these is building a case over several paragraphs. You will not get your question answered in a single paragraph. So the paragraphs are created as a formulaic way of writing academic information. And the first of these is to have a topic sentence. Now, in a topic sentence, what you are doing is introducing the topic. You are saying what this particular paragraph is going to be about. And then you put in some prove-it sentences. Now, you can usually have 2 or 3, you can have more, but the prove-it sentences are all about explaining what the topic sentence is about, in other words, expanding on it, supporting it with evidence, that is, giving examples and referencing it, and also discussing it. So maybe you've got a number of people who disagree in your readings, so you might need to bring those ideas up. And then we follow up the final sentence in any body paragraph with a clinch-it sentence. That is, what on earth was this paragraph about and why is it important? So you can either sum up the paragraph you've just written, or if your idea travels across 2 paragraphs, then you might introduce the next idea or the next stage of that particular idea. Paraphrasing is a vital part of academic writing. You need to be able to write in your own language, not necessarily in the language of the authors that you have read. Paraphrasing always uses another's ideas, and because of that, they need to be acknowledged. And there are a number of methods that we can use. Firstly, you can change the structure. In other words, play with the words, rearrange the sentences, see if they still make the same points. You can change the words as well, and changing the words is very handy, but please be aware that if you are just simply going to take some information and change a few words and claim that that is paraphrasing, then you might actually be quite mistaken, because words cannot easily be swapped over, so you need to maintain the integrity of the sentence that you are paraphrasing as well. There are a number of steps to paraphrasing. You need to read the document or the sentence that you're going to paraphrase to understand what the message is that is contained within it. Then you can highlight the key words or concepts within that sentence or paragraph, and then summarize the text in your own words using those key words or key concepts. You can also find synonyms for ideas, but again, be very careful because words don't necessarily have meanings that are easily transferable from one context to another. Finally, you can rewrite the sentence to change its structure altogether. So let's have a look at what happens when we paraphrase. Here we have a document out of a book called The Teeth Are Smiling. It was a textbook about Aboriginality in Australia, and particularly in the rural area. And this particular chapter is about Aboriginal rural education program. And what I've done here is highlighted one single paragraph. Vasta and castles are the source, and there are 182 words altogether within that paragraph. And I'm about to paraphrase it for you. So the first thing I do is I start reading for meaning and identify the key concepts. Now, if we look on the right-hand side here, you'll see that paragraph is still highlighted with the, still surrounded with the red box. But on the left, I have expanded it and I have highlighted it, and you can see here that the highlighting is only a few words and phrases throughout. Now let's just read that, because if you've done paraphrasing correctly, then the reading should make sense. So here we have, Freire conceptualized education as a process of conscientization. Education is not neutral, it serves particular purposes. The processes have shaped lives and continue to marginalise subjects which build on students' knowledge and experience, giving macro and micro understandings of the manifestations of racism rather than concentrating on the pathology of the individual. Now, that in itself could be considered a first step in paraphrasing. It certainly isn't the end, because you haven't basically changed the structure. The ideas are still being presented in the same series. So, what we have here now is one key term or concept which needs to be included in the paraphrasing, and we have a lot of specialised vocabulary that we need to consider. Conscientisation is, of course, the key term or concept, and you'll find in a lot of textbooks that key terms tend to be italicised or placed in bold, so it's a bit of a clue to finding them. So let's have a look at what happens when we do the finished product. Here is our summary. On the right, pretty much the same. I've added a few words simply to make it into better English, but that basically tells us exactly the same as we saw in our previous summary. But when we paraphrase, we now need to cut that down even further, and we need to make it more succinct. So what I have written here, as you can see, is a much shorter version. In fact, we have 26 words and a reference out of the original 150, whatever number that was. So you can see that paraphrasing is a multiple step process. It's not something that you can simply do in your head immediately. Have a practice of it, because the more you practice, the better you get. All right, and now we get to the referencing. Now, the referencing is often the part that students find the most difficult. In fact, it's not all that hard if you know what you are looking for. The first thing you need to be aware of is that there are certain details that are absolutely important. They are vital. And some of these details need to be inserted into your text, and some of them need to be inserted into a reference list. And the reference list has to be assembled in a very particular way. So let's gather the resource information. There are 4 items we need to collect for every resource that we research and use in our written work. You need to collect the data as you research, so please make sure that you are not leaving it till the end and then trying to find references. Collect your data and make sure that you have all 4 items. The first of these is the author. Then we need the date. We need the title of the document itself. And then we need the publication or source details. Let's have a look at how this gets put together. Inside the text, you will need to reference whenever you use a direct quote. Now, this is the least effective way of referencing, and basically it's because you are only permitted to put 10% of your total word count into quotes. But you don't get any marks for quotes. Quoting is something that is there for people who cannot think for themselves, who are not able to rearrange words, or if the quote itself is so fabulous that you couldn't think of another single way in the world that you could possibly present it in a better way. It must link to the correct prose style, however. So if you are putting a direct quote into an assignment and you're already part of a sentence and the quote begins with at the beginning of a sentence, then you're going to have to make some changes. You also have to separate some words from the main text, depending on the number of words you're using for quotes. And in APA, which is your referencing style, they have to go within double inverted commas if there are fewer than 39 words, and those double inverted commas mean that they actually continue with the prose of the sentence that you're writing, or you need to indent them in a separate paragraph of their own if there are more than 40 words. Both styles, regardless, need a page number identification. If you are quoting directly, you must supply a page number. Without one, your quote is automatically invalidated. And here's an example. Smith 2018, comma, which is the APA format, P.27 claims that quoting indicates a lack of either understanding or literacy. By the way, I'm making up these examples. You won't find them in real life. All right, the next step in paraphrasing is paraphrasing. Now, this is the best use of resources because it presents your own voice. It says what you are saying about the document that you have read, and it indicates that you've understood the material and you do not require any specific punctuation, but you must reference. Even though it's in your own words, the ideas came from somewhere else and these need to be acknowledged. And here's an example. There are some situations when quoting is appropriate, such as definitions of specialist terms. And you can see here that because I am paraphrasing, I now put the author's name and date into brackets, and you'll notice also that the full stop goes on the outside of the closed brackets. If the full stop is on the inside or on the at the end of the sentence before the quotation, before the reference itself, then you will be considered to have made an error. Now, there are two types of in-text referencing. There's author prominent, where the author name forms part of the prose itself. The date is always placed within brackets, and it should appear as close as possible after the author's name as you can put it. So here's an example. Despite Smith's 2018 claim, there is agreement that, and then you continue your sentence. Information prominent, on the other hand, the author's name and date appear within brackets, just as my previous example on the previous slide showed you. It usually follows the data. Sometimes you can find them in the middle of a sentence, but generally it's at the end of the sentence. And here is an example. References are vital, in brackets, Jones, 2019. And then you can continue the sentence or full stop if that is the end of it. Now, creating an APA reference list is the one area where students often find themselves falling apart, but it's not all that difficult. The title APA references is bold and centered. Each component of the references, that is all of those 4 items that you had to find, is classified as an individual sentence. That is, it begins with a capital letter and ends with a full stop. It is presented alphabetical order by author's first name, and that includes if the author happens to be an organisation, and it has a hanging indent. Now, hanging indents, you'll need to go to the academic computing site, and you can download some information on how to do that if you do not know how to do it already, or you can attend a workshop on it. We have to have double line spacing, so it continues with the same spacing as the main body of your assignment. There are no spaces between entries, and that's because you've got hanging indent. You don't need spaces. And you have very specific use of punctuations, italic and upper and lower case. The reference list is often the area that students find the most difficult to deal with because it's new, but truly it's not that difficult. Here is our heading. It's emboldened and it's centered. And now we have our first reference. And you can see here that I have two authors, Abel and Main. The surnames come first and the initials come afterwards. Each surname is followed by a comma and each initial by a full stop. And if I have more than one author, then we also use the ampersand instead of the word and to separate them, but we also need a comma before the ampersand. Now, this is not grammatically correct if you were putting it into prose, because we don't put commas in front of the word and, but in APA referencing, this is the way in which the reference list must be compiled. So that's our first sentence. Abel, comma, B full stop, comma, ampersand, main, comma, T full stop. Our second sentence is the date, and the date in APA always appears within brackets. So here we have 2008 within brackets, full stop afterwards. The title of the document, if it is a book, as it is in this particular case, is presented as something in italics, but is also in what we call minimal capitalization, which means the first letter of the first word is capitalized and no other words, unless they are proper nouns, are capitalized. In this particular instance, the book is a second edition, so that goes within brackets, and you can see that the edition has been truncated to ED full stop, and we have a full stop on the outside of the brackets, so that comprises our third sentence. Our fourth reference list sentence is the source, and here we have New York, that is the city, with a colon, and then the name of the publisher, which is the NYU Press, full stop. If we're looking at something slightly different, here we have an example of a document that is from a journal, and it's only a single author, so we don't need to worry too much about that ampersand again. Our first sentence is Jones, comma, M, full stop. Our second sentence, open brackets, 2019, close brackets, full stop. Our third sentence is the title of the document, but you can see here that the title of the document, while it is finished with a full stop, is not placed in italics. And that is because for journals, it is the title of the journal that goes in italics, not the title of the article that came out of that journal. So the Journal of Tertiary Experience, comma, and after that we have more information. The 11 refers to the volume of that journal, and the 3 in brackets is the issue number. And those two items are important. You may, if you want to, add pages after that, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. You put a full stop at the close of brackets. The final item I have there is a DOI number. Now, DOI stands for the same thing as the ISBN number within a hard copy textbook has. That is, it is an identifier that is unique to that particular document, and even if the document is moved to a dozen different websites, you will still be able to find it by simply punching in that DOI number. And all DOI numbers start with 10 point something or other. Our final example here is one that comes from a website. So here again we have an author, comma, initial, full stop, open brackets, a date, close brackets, full stop. Because it's a website, we don't have a book or a journal that we can go to italicize, so the name of the document itself is italicized. Writing good assignments, full stop. And then we write retrieved from, and you place in the URL of that document, remembering that there is no full stop at the end of a URL. And that's the basics of referencing. There's a great deal more to it, but if you want to learn more or want some practice at getting better at it, please attend one of the ALC workshops and we'll take you through your referencing in minute detail. Now, once you've done all of that, you've got your assignment basically written, your first draft has been done, you've got your references together. They may not be complete yet, but that's all right. Now we need to get to the stage where we proofread, we edit, and we submit. So, the first thing you need to do is let it rest for a day. Do not try and do your proofreading as soon as you are finished, because you will miss most of the errors. Fresh eyes will always pick up errors more easily. The second thing you'll need to do is read aloud to an audience, even if the audience is only you, because hearing also aids recognition of issues, and if you happen to have somebody you are reading to, then their feedback will assist you with your rationale making. There may be some ideas that are not clearly explained. An audience will give you that feedback and allow you to make those corrections. So you make the amendments as needed, and you should make them as soon as possible after they have been recognised. And you can also check your work against Turnitin for a similarity score, just to ensure that what you have written is in fact your work and not too close to the work of any other author. And the final stage, of course, then is to submit. And when you do, make sure it's on time and it's in the right format. Make sure by going back to your unit profile and reading the instructions for submission. Now, if you want more information, I have been saying the ALC workshops are very handy for this, to be able to practice these skills and to learn a little bit more intimate detail about them. You might also want to download a referencing guide. Now, the referencing guides should be available from the library, but I haven't been able to find them, so I'm sure they're there somewhere, but the ALC Moodle sites have all got referencing lists on them. You can also apply for an ALC assignment review before you submit. Now, it needs 3 days for turnaround if you're coming through the ALC, but you can also use your tutor, which I think is going to be called Studiosity next term. So if you want to send them there, they will usually do the turnaround within 24 hours. They don't give quite as much detail as the ALC does, but then we're into the role of teaching you what your errors are, not just pointing them out to you. All right, thank you very much for attending, and if you have any queries, please feel free to contact the Academic Learning Centre. The ALC for further advice if you're still uncertain, and that's it. Thank you.